So outcomes, very, very briefly, as I mentioned earlier, about 15 to 20% come to ICU. Majority of them in most of the studies were intubated, about close to 76%. NIV use is coming up right now, but it was much low. It's much lower than invasive ventilation, and the mortality ranges from 27 to 65%. In the study done from Wuhan, what they found is when a patient was invasively ventilated, the mortality was 92%, as opposed to non-invasive ventilation where the mortality was 40.8. I thought I'd just very, very briefly take you through our experience. We've had about 450 critically ill patients who've come into MICU. This is the age group. They were in their 50s. More males came into to the ICU, and about 60 to 70% of them had moderate to severe ARDS. They did have high D-dimers and high neutrophil lymphocyte ratio more than 3.13. Now, this is the breakdown of the patients where we used NIV. So you can see that in normal ARDS, we wouldn't even consider using NIV for a severe ARDS. But here, actually, we have used for 28 of these severe ARDS, we've exclusively used NIV. And what we found, in general, if you look at it, the outcomes of our group of patients, 17% mortality in patients. Now, this is an overall outcome of patients who were managed with moderate ARDS in ICU, either intubation or NIV, and 18% mortality patients with severe ARDS. Now, this is an overall outcome that we have seen here. So here again, you can see that NIV use was in over 3/4 of our patients. So we've been using more of NIV, less of invasive. And as I mentioned earlier, our patients were not, we can't say that they were not unwell. They did have moderate to severe ARDS, and their average length of stay was between, I would say, 6 to 10 days, and some, I think it's even longer right now. Most of them stay in ICU for at least 2 to 3 weeks. Mortality, overall mortality in our group of patients was about 19% in ICU, 21.3% in hospital, and we have had an increase. We have noticed that definitely infections are going up. I don't know whether it's because of the increased hospital stay or whether it's because of the use of steroids. Now, just to break it down, because there's always a concern about intubation, should we intubate patients with COVID-19? Is there any benefit? Okay. Out of experience, what we have seen here, we definitely need to present more data to support, but what we have seen here is in the patients who are intubated in ED, 53% of them actually died, okay, in ICU, and about 60% of them who were intubated in ICU after a failed NIV trial died. So this is actually, I would say, approximately, maybe the mortality of intubated patients in our group of patients is about 60 to 70%. We've actually seen about 30-40% of our patients actually walk out, go home. We've done a tracheostomy and successfully sent one patient home only, but no one else has actually had a tracheostomy done. So this is our outcomes that we've had in CMC. I also want to share this picture with you just to kind of tell you how long it takes. So this is an intubated patient, a survivor who's gone home right now. He's been at home for 2 months after the illness. Now, here you can see that it takes a very, very long time. This is the PF ratio. It is sitting at 60 and slightly over 100, and it's only by day 18 that you're actually seeing the PF ratio jump. Okay, so what we feel is, if you want to say, if you feel the patient is worth a young patient, if bed crunch is not there, 14 days, at least 7 to 10 days trial should be given to these patients. But generally what we see that it can take up to 15 days to see an improvement in patients. But if patients do not improve by 15 days, it probably does not make sense in continuing or escalating treatment too much. So I'd like to conclude here by just highlighting a few things. ARDS in COVID is definitely different to other ARDS. There is a role X-rays are useful, but may not reveal the true picture. It is very, very important that some skill learning in ultrasound lung to pick up some findings which you may not see in the chest X-ray. Important that when you have patients in the ward who are requiring oxygen, start them on remdesivir and dexamethasone. There is a possible role for therapeutic anticoagulation in patients whom you don't know whether there's any other reason for deterioration. Definitely in COVID ARDS, there is a role for trying NIV and awake proning. As I mentioned, what helps is the PEEP, more than anything else. So it's, even if you put, in the ward here, what people are using is just a Bain circuit also, connecting it to the wall, oxygen, and that also gives some PEEP, and it gives some oxygen. The only catch is that there may be a risk of CO2 rebreathing, but these are also, essentially the bottom line is what they need is a lot of PEEP. There is inflammation early on, and when you give that positive pressure, it kind of pushes away the inflammation and interstitial inflammation and helps in improving oxygenation. If a patient is intubated, follow the standard ARDS protocol. For safety of the staff, make sure closed suction catheters are used and viral filters are used at the patient end and at the ventilator end. All this would not have been possible, definitely without the help of the administration. Administration was extremely supportive. The Hospital Infection Control Committee, HICC committee, they were very helpful. And there were a lot of people who were involved with guiding us in terms of the treatment algorithms, and a lot of people came in, and that actually boosted our confidence. And to date, actually, all of us who are working in the ICU say that we look forward to going to work. And I think that should be the way everyone should be. So like even our registrars, they are a bunch of very enthusiastic people, and we are very grateful to them for the effort and the enthusiasm that they've been putting in. Not just the registrars, I wish I had a photograph of our nurses and therapists and attenders and sweepers. Everyone has worked together, and there's no fear. There is no fear. No one is scared about it, but they passionately take care of patients and show them the love and care that if their relatives were there. So I'll stop here, and I'm happy to answer some questions.
Thanks, Vinala, for that wonderful talk. You highlighted a lot of things in relation to some practical aspects and evidence-based aspects of managing patients with COVID-19. We have a few questions. Please continue to enter your questions in the chat box, and we'll try and answer them as efficiently as we can. There's a question from Roshin. Hi, Roshin. Hope you're well. It's a question about the frequency of myocarditis associated with COVID-19. Is it necessary to send biomarkers routinely? And do you require an echo routinely to diagnose myocarditis, and what is the frequency?
So, Roshan, what we have seen was when we started off, do a lot of cardiac enzymes and NT-proBNP, but honestly, echoes also are being done routinely in ICU. We've got Kishore there who's over-enthusiastic about echoes. So, as you have pointed out, actually, myocarditis we have hardly seen in patients. Echoes also are, I would say, 99% normal. So if you do not have the facility to do echoes or cardiac enzymes, that's fine. I would say at least do an ECG, because that can give you some clue as to what the cardiac function would be like. But myocarditis is, at least in our group, I don't know actually, when I hear different stories from different centers where they say that they see a lot of cytokine storm, we haven't seen that here. So are there different presentations in different areas? Is there a genetic predisposition to something else? I'm not sure, but we're not seeing it here. From our experience, almost nil myocarditis.
Another question in regard to the cardiovascular system in COVID. Is there a role of diuretics, and how is your fluid management in patients with COVID-19 with ARDS?
So actually our patients in COVID, in ARDS, COVID ARDS as such, we run them on a neutral balance. Most of them are actually dry, and we don't really see very much the role of regular diuretics. Definitely when we are close to extubation or weaning them off, we try and keep them neutral. So regular use of diuretics is we are not practicing. We keep them on a neutral balance, not extremely negative or positive as well. So.
Obviously, with awake proning and NIV, patients' cooperation is an issue. What sedation would you advise to somebody who's not really tolerating NIV or tolerating awake prone?
So we use dexmedetomidine here, which is an alpha-2 agonist, which actually helps. A lot of patients actually are comfortable. Now, one catch is I'm sure those of you who have managed patients with COVID-19 would have noticed that patients are bradycardic. And one side effect of Dexmed is it can increase the bradycardia, but the good thing is we've not actually seen any hemodynamic dysfunction or instability as a result of this bradycardia. So dexmedetomidine is an expensive drug to give. It's not something which can be given for all patients. At times, I have actually, even just to improve patient cooperation, it actually helps just to kind of tell the patient to hold the mask on themselves and let them gradually increase the pressure. Sit up, hold the mask, keep increasing the pressure till they're comfortable. A tiny dose of midazolam as an anxiolytic actually helps, maybe even 0.5, 1 milligram, and it helps. And we actually add on a little bit of alprazolam at night just to help them sleep, make them comfortable. So if Dexmed, is not an option, these are other options which can be tried to improve compliance with NIV.
What is the role of high flow nasal cannula? For those not familiar with the device, these are nasal cannula which allow a high flow of air and oxygen at the flow rate of about 50 to 60 liters per minute with humidification. What is the role of HFNC? I think you touched upon it.
Yeah, so see, there are reports that HFNC is beneficial for COVID. But surprisingly, in our group of patients, when we put them on HFNC, they've actually wanted to take it off. As Pritish said, it's 50, 60 liters of air which is actually going into a patient. So a patient who's got severe flow starvation will feel satisfied. Someone who's breathing very, very hard will feel satisfied. But someone who's not breathing that far may actually get a little suffocated with that high flow nasal. There is a PEEP benefit. So they say that every 10 liters of high flow nasal contributes to 1 centimeter of PEEP. But there's a loss of PEEP because the mouth is kept open and all that. So effectively with 60 liters of high flow nasal, you can get a PEEP of 3 centimeters of water. So we do try them on high flow nasal, but as I mentioned earlier, the patient tolerance to high flow nasal in our group of patients is low. So we just kind of switch over to just keep them on a Venturi or a non-rebreather mask.
Another practical question: what is the role of empirical antibiotics in patients who come in sick with severe ARDS, and how do you decide when to start and stop and de-escalate antibiotics?
So when a patient comes in with a severe pneumonia, you don't know whether it's viral or bacterial, and definitely at that point of time you start them on a broad spectrum antibiotic, an atypical cover like maybe piperacillin, tazobactam, azithromycin, and antiviral therapy. But the moment we usually by the time the COVID test comes, we also see a response to maybe the NIV or whatever. And in those kind of situations, and if the patient is on NIV and is doing better on NIV, many times you just give 3 to 5 days of the piperacillin tazobactam or stop it also. Some patients we have stopped it early within 24 to 48 hours. But if you think that the patient has a secondary bacterial infection, which you may get some clues for by looking at the counts, you have leukocytosis, neutrophilic predominance, it may suggest that the patient may have a superadded bacterial infection, which is common in patients with viral ARDS as well. So I think every patient is different. You need to look at the patient and decide, is this patient likely to have a bacterial infection based on lab parameters and based on the patient per se. If you are in doubt, if you see a lobar consolidation in a patient, patient is not tubed, you don't have a culture to take, I would say keep it on till you have confirmed blood cultures come back as negative. But 5 days would be a reasonable time, 5 to 7 days.
Thanks, Vinla. Some more questions in relation to some adjunctive therapies, and I think you touched upon that, the role of convalescent plasma. Vinla spoke about the fact that there are some observational data from the US showing reduced mortality, but a randomized controlled trial done here in India, the PLACID trial, did not show benefit. So routine use of convalescent plasma is really questionable. Your experience with tocilizumab and cytokine storm in these patients, I think you touched upon that as well.
Yeah, so we've not had it. I would say that we've used tocilizumab for 1 or 2 patients. I would not call that as experience enough, sufficient experience. But as I mentioned, based on the data that is coming out, there's probably no role for tocilizumab. That's all I can say at this point of time.
How do you prognosticate patients? There's a question on survival at, say, day 7 or survival at day 14. How do you know whether a patient is likely to survive? How do you decide on, say, futility of care?
That's a very difficult question to answer. Very challenging situation for us at the bedside also to, it's very easy when I see a patient who is on invasive ventilation where the oxygenation is terrible and the carbon dioxide is going up, there is no point of going on and on. As I mentioned earlier, we have generally seen benefit in patients by day 5 to day 7, patients on NIV, and patients who are intubated, we see a benefit by, if what we have seen is beyond day 15, if there's no benefit, we start counseling the patients that there's unlikely to be a benefit and at least prepare them for a, what we would say, a non-escalation in case situations get worse. There are a lot of gray zones in ICU. There's no blanket right or wrong answer. And I think each case has to be looked at in correlation, keeping in perspective the patient also, patient's comorbidities, patient's functionality, and the current situation in the patient. Is there, if there's zero improvement, or if there's, we start counseling the family and preparing them that there's probably no point in an intubated patient beyond 15 days. We will not continue and persist and aggressively push them if there's no signs of improvement. So, difficult question, and I can't give a...
What is the, one aspect of the question is, what is the probability of survival of somebody who's been in ICU for 14 days?
Now we have to do a proper analysis of that. I can't give you any, definitive numbers. A time-based thing has to be looked at, but definitely patients who've stayed beyond 14 days, likelihood of survival is much lower. If they get better by 14 to 18 days, and they go out of the ICU. But as I mentioned, our average length of stay, let's say pre-COVID, was 7 to 10 days. Now our average length of stay is 2 to 3 weeks.
There is a question on reinfection. Have you seen any patients with reinfection with COVID?
I've not seen any patient with reinfection, though I have heard of a staff who's had a second COVID test positive, but we don't know. In ICU per se, no reinfection that I've seen.
How about when a patient has a cardiac arrest, somebody who's on NIV and inadvertently has a cardiac arrest? How would you go ahead in managing such a patient?
I think you need to decide, is the situation reversible or not? Okay, so doing CPR in a patient who's COVID positive poses a risk for a whole bunch of healthcare workers. And if the reason for the patient's arrest is severe hypoxemia and or a ventilatory problem, like a lot of CO2 retention, the likelihood that you're going to get the patient back by intubating and doing CPR is less likely. You can, so in that situation, essentially assess for factors of reversibility. Maybe do a blood gas, see if there's something which is reversible, do a lung ultrasound or an X-ray to see if there's a pneumothorax, see if there's something which is reversible. If there's nothing reversible, it's just disease per se which has caused the patient to arrest because of severe hypoxemia. I would suggest that, in those kind of situations, good clinical practice would make me counsel the families to say that if this patient arrests, we will not be doing CPR in this situation because it is not going to change outcomes. And there is a risk to healthcare workers during the CPR per se.
There was a question on hydroxychloroquine, which is not part of standard treatment with COVID, so we'll move on from that. In terms of what is the reason for the bradycardia that we see in COVID? Many patients have hypertension and bradycardia. What is the reason for bradycardia? It's an interesting question.
I wish I knew. We have looked it up and we've not really found an answer to that. So just like in typhoid, we do see a bradycardia. Similarly in COVID, it is definitely an observation in some patients. But as I mentioned, the bradycardia is not associated with hemodynamic instability. So we don't really worry too much about it. Make sure there is no heart blocks, so with ECG will help to just look at that carefully, but otherwise don't worry too much about it. And I'm not sure of the reason. I don't think people have really been able to figure out the reasons for this bradycardia.
I think there are a few questions on anticoagulations. I request you to go back to the previous lecture, which was entirely dedicated to the role of anticoagulants in COVID. And any role in nitric oxide in patients admitted with ARDS and COVID?
So nitric oxide in ARDS per se is not standard of care. And in pediatric cases, there may be some benefit in improving ventilation perfusion matching, but we wouldn't use it in this situation. It's not used in standard ARDS management as well.
Another very practical question: how do you, what point do you decide to wean and discharge patients from ICU, step down to say a closely monitored ward?
So the moment, like here in CMC, we have the luxury of having an area where we can continue, stepping down our NIV management. But the moment the patient is off NIV for 24 to 36 hours and is on a Venturi mask, the patient can be shifted to a ward setting, a level 2 ward where there can be some monitoring done before shifting to an area where there is less monitoring.
There's a few questions on the duration of steroid and remdesivir and the role of ivermectin. Ivermectin we didn't really talk about.
Yeah, so I mean, there's no real hard evidence to support its use. The confusing thing about COVID, is like you have antiparasitic agents which have been tried, all kinds of agents which have been tried, antivirals, and really the benefit is not being proven. There are reports of benefit with ivermectin. There is a study which is ongoing looking at the role of ivermectin, so but it's not standard of care.
Sure. So I think we've completed most of the questions asked. In regard to the protocol per se, the CMC protocol for managing COVID can be accessed as well by contacting the staff training center here. And so thank you very much, Binla. It was a very informative and useful talk. You covered a lot of practical aspects. And I think all of us have been blessed to hear from you, and I hope that all of you who have been patiently listening to the talk have been satisfied with the ICU management of patients with COVID-19. Thank you. I'd like to hand over to Dr. Thomas Ram.
Sure. Dear friends, I'm Thomas Ram. I serve as Associate Director at CMC, and also we are coordinating a lot of training within the institution and outside through what we have established as the COVID Command Center. And we have a separate training vertical. I see a lot of new people in today's session. I'd like to welcome all of you. I see all of you are from various parts of the country, and I saw even one participant was from Australia. So thank you for sparing your time, and I hope this session was useful. And I was watching the chat box where so many queries were shown up, and I see that a lot of our mission hospital doctors are here, and also there are a lot of doctors who have been enrolled in the Tata Trust CMC COVID-19 preparedness program. So I'd like to welcome all of them. And as we have shared with you this session will be available soon on the YouTube link. What you're seeing, the QR code on the screen, if you grab that QR code, it will straight away take you to the playlist of the COVID Pulse in CMC Vellore YouTube channel. And I'd like to thank our faculty today, Dr. Anand Zakaria, who had conceptualized this whole COVID Pulse series along with other faculty in the Department of Medicine, Allied Specialties. Special thank to Dr. Binila. She was very succinct in sharing her experience of such a complex topic during this pandemic. And Dr. Pratish for being an excellent moderator. So once more, thank all of you. God bless you and stay safe.